On a July morning in 1994, Marcus Webb stood in front of an oak stump and felt his career slipping away. 2 weeks earlier, this had seemed like a simple problem. The 300-year-old oak that had stood in the middle of his development was gone, cut down, hauled away, turned into lumber. All that remained was the stump. But what a stump it was! The trunk had been 8 feet across at the base. The root system spread 40 feet in every direction, thick as telephone poles near the center, branching and rebranching into thousands of smaller roots that gripped the Missouri clay like fingers wrapped around a fist. This tree had been growing since before the American Revolution. Its roots had had 3 centuries to dig themselves into the earth. Marcus had figured his new excavator would handle it in an afternoon. He'd been wrong. Marcus was 42 years old and had been building things in central Missouri for 20 years. He'd started as a framing carpenter, worked his way up to site foreman, and eventually started his own company. Webb Development was now the biggest residential contractor in Callaway County. Luxury subdivisions, custom homes, the kind of projects that made other builders jealous. Marcus had a gift for marketing. He drove a white Mercedes convertible with Webb Development painted on the doors. He wore designer clothes to job sites. He brought clients out to watch his equipment work, made a show of the massive machines moving earth, the raw power of modern construction. He called himself the builder who gets it done. His competitors called him the showman. The Deer Creek Estates project was supposed to be his masterpiece. 50 luxury homes on 5-acre lots starting at $500,000, a gated community with its own private lake, tennis courts, a clubhouse. The entrance road curved gracefully through a stand of mature trees, creating exactly the impression Marcus wanted: money, prestige, nature tame but present. The design called for the road to pass within feet of where the old oak had stood. The tree itself had been easy enough to remove, but the stump remained right in the path of where the road needed to go. "We'll pull it out this weekend," Marcus had told his crew. "Should take maybe an hour." That had been 2 weeks ago. Now he stood there with hydraulic fluid on his shoes, 3 burst hoses in a pile behind him, and absolutely no idea what to do next. The Caterpillar 350 excavator was Marcus's pride and joy. $400,000 financed over 7 years. 40 tons of yellow steel and hydraulic power, a machine that could dig a swimming pool in a day. Marcus had driven the excavator himself for this job, wanting to show his crew how it was done. He'd positioned the machine on solid ground, extended the boom, wrapped the bucket around the base of the stump, and engaged the hydraulics. The excavator groaned. The tracks dug into the dirt. The engine screamed. The stump didn't move. Marcus pushed harder. The hydraulic lines began to whine, pressure building beyond their rated capacity. He should have backed off. Any experienced operator would have. But Marcus wasn't an experienced operator. He was a salesman who knew how to drive heavy equipment badly. The first hose blew at 3:47 in the afternoon with a sound like a gunshot. Hydraulic fluid sprayed across the machine, the stump, and Marcus's designer jeans. The excavator's arm went limp. "Get the spare hoses," Marcus ordered, face red with embarrassment. "We'll fix it and try again." They fixed it. They tried again. A second hose blew. They brought in a bulldozer to push while the excavator pulled. The bulldozer's tracks spun uselessly on the clay soil while the excavator strained against its limits. A third hose blew. Now it was 2 weeks later, $30,000 in repairs and delays gone, and the stump sat exactly where it had always been, immovable, ancient, mocking. Marcus stood with his site foreman Dean Curtis, working through their options. None were good. "We could blast it," Dean suggested. "Dynamite, too close to the property line. County would never permit it. Chemicals? Takes 6 months. We don't have 6 months. The buyers for the first phase close in October. If that road isn't in by September, we're in breach of contract. Then we dig around it manually. Chainsaws for the roots. Marcus shook his head. I got a quote. 40 men, 3 weeks, $250,000. And even then, they said they might not be able to move the center mass. That stump goes down at least 15 feet. They stood in silence, looking at the stump like it was an enemy fortress they couldn't breach. That's when the old Caterpillar crawler came clanking up the access road. Chester Holloway was 71 years old and had farmed 320 acres on the edge of the development for 45 years. He'd watched the bulldozers arrive 6 months ago, watched them clear the land that had been his neighbor's farm for generations. He kept his mouth shut when the construction traffic tore up the county road, said nothing when the dust from the grading settled on his crops. Chester Holloway wasn't a complainer. He was a watcher. And for 2 weeks, he'd been watching Marcus Webb throw expensive equipment at an oak stump and lose. Chester had grown up pulling stumps, not with excavators, not with hydraulics. He'd grown up with chains and pulleys and the patient application of physics. His father Emmett had bought the Caterpillar 20 crawler in 1932 during the worst of the Depression, paid $800 for it used, and it had been the most expensive purchase of his life. The Caterpillar 20 weighed about 5,000 pounds and made maybe 25 horsepower. Compared to Marcus Webb's excavator, it was a toy. But it had been designed for one purpose: pulling. Pulling plows through heavy soil. Pulling stumps out of fields being cleared for crops. Pulling loads that horses couldn't move and men couldn't budge. Chester had watched his father use that crawler for 20 years, taken it over when Emmett died in 1967, and kept it ever since, for the jobs where nothing else would work. Jobs like this. The sound came first, a metallic clanking, rhythmic and slow, like the heartbeat of some ancient iron beast. Then the machine crested the small rise separating Chester's farm from the construction site. The Caterpillar 20 was small by modern standards, maybe 8 feet long, 5 feet wide, painted a rust orange that had faded over 60 years to the color of dried blood. Its tracks were steel, not rubber. Chester sat in the open operator's seat. No cab, no air conditioning, no comfort of any kind. Behind the crawler, he towed a trailer loaded with chains, pulleys, cables, and wooden blocks, equipment that looked like it belonged in a museum of industrial archaeology. Marcus watched with a mixture of confusion and contempt. What the hell is that? Chester Holloway's tractor, Dean answered. Farms the property next door. Been here forever. It looks like it belongs in a scrapyard. It's old, but Chester keeps it running. I don't care what he uses it for. This is a closed construction site. Someone tell him to turn around. But before anyone could move, Chester had already stopped the crawler and climbed down, 71-year-old bones taking their time, and walked toward Marcus with the unhurried gait of a man who had nothing to prove and nowhere else to be. Morning, Chester said. Marcus crossed his arms. This site is closed to visitors. Insurance liability. I'm not a visitor. I'm your neighbor. Chester nodded toward the stump. Saw you've been having some trouble with that oak. We've got it handled. Chester looked at the stump, then at the excavator with its limp hydraulic arm and the puddle of fluid beneath it. His expression didn't change. Looks like it. Is there something you wanted? Thought I might be able to help. I've pulled a few stumps in my time. Marcus laughed. It started as a chuckle and built into something louder, meaner. The construction workers nearby stopped to watch. You thought you might help? With that? He pointed at the Caterpillar 20. That thing weighs what, 2 tons? About that. My excavator weighs 40 tons. My bulldozer weighs 30. Together they couldn't move that stump an inch. Marcus shook his head, still laughing. And you think your antique toy is going to do what my $500,000 in equipment couldn't? Chester didn't respond to the laughter. He just looked at the stump, studying it the way a doctor studies an X-ray. "Your machines are stronger than mine," he said finally. "But strength isn't the problem. The problem is application. Application. You're trying to rip that stump out all at once. Hydraulics push and pull in straight lines. They're designed for lifting, for digging. But a stump like this isn't held by one force. It's held by thousands of roots, each one anchored in a different direction. You can't beat all those forces at once. You have to beat them one at a time." Marcus's laughter had faded. "And how exactly do you propose to do that?" "Mechanical advantage. Pulleys. Patience." Chester nodded toward his trailer. "I've got a block and tackle system that multiplies force by a factor of 6. My crawler makes about 25 horsepower at the drawbar. With the pulleys, that becomes effectively 150 horsepower applied slowly and steadily from the right angle. That still isn't as much as my excavator." "No, but it's applied differently. Your excavator makes power in bursts. Hydraulic pressure builds, reaches its limit, and either something moves or something breaks. My system doesn't have a limit. It just keeps pulling, keeps applying force, until the roots give up one at a time." Marcus crossed his arms. "This is ridiculous." "Maybe. But you've been trying for 2 weeks, and that stump hasn't moved. What have you got to lose?" Marcus looked at the stump, then at his broken excavator, then at his crew, all of them watching, waiting to see what he'd do. His pride told him to send the old man away. His schedule told him he was running out of options. "Fine," Marcus said. "Show me what your museum piece can do. But when it breaks down trying, you're hauling it off my site yourself." Chester didn't rush. He spent the first hour just walking around the stump, studying it from every angle, kneeling to examine exposed roots, sometimes pushing a steel rod into the ground to gauge depth. Marcus had retreated to his Mercedes, sitting in the air-conditioned interior, making phone calls or pretending to. When Chester was satisfied, he began unloading his equipment. The block and tackle system was deceptively simple. A series of pulleys, each one reducing the force needed to move a given weight by half. 6 pulleys in sequence meant every pound of pulling force from the crawler translated to 6 pounds of force on whatever was being pulled. But the real key wasn't the pulleys. It was the anchor points. Chester didn't try to wrap a single chain around the stump and pull. He spent another hour selecting attachment points, individual roots, exposed sections of the main trunk, places where he could apply force to specific parts of the root system. He drove steel stakes into the ground 30 feet from the stump. He ran chains from these anchors to the stump, threaded through the blocks back to his crawler. When he was finished, the stump was wrapped in a web of chains and cables, each leading to a different pulley, each pulley angled to apply force in a different direction. "What is all this?" one of the workers asked. "Physics," Chester said. "The roots on the north side are shallower than the ones on the south. I'm going to pull the north side first, pop those roots out one at a time. Then the east side, then the west. The south side will come last, and by then the stump won't have anything left to hold on to." "How long?" "If nothing breaks, maybe 4 hours." The worker laughed. "Marcus has been at this for 2 weeks. Marcus has been fighting the whole stump at once. I'm going to take it apart piece by piece." Chester climbed onto the Caterpillar 20, started the engine, and let it warm up. The old motor coughed and sputtered, then settled into a steady rhythm, not smooth like modern engines, but consistent, dependable. He engaged the clutch and began to move forward, taking up the slack in the first chain. The chain went taut. The pulleys creaked. The crawler's tracks dug into the ground. For a long moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then Chester saw what he was looking for, a tremor in the soil on the north side of the stump, a crack appearing in the clay. The first root, buried 3 feet down, was beginning to move. He kept the throttle steady. The crawler pulled. The pulleys multiplied. The root resisted. Then, with a sound like a massive knuckle cracking, the root broke free. The construction crew, which had been watching with skeptical amusement, went silent. Chester didn't celebrate. He didn't even acknowledge the success. He simply disengaged the clutch, repositioned the chain to the next attachment point, and began pulling again. For the first hour, Marcus stayed in his Mercedes, convinced the old farmer would give up at any moment. When the first root broke free, he got out and walked closer, arms crossed, face skeptical. When the third root broke free, Marcus stopped crossing his arms. When the fifth root broke free, he started pacing. By the time Chester had worked his way around to the east side, Marcus was standing at the edge of the work area with his mouth slightly open, watching something he couldn't quite believe. The stump was moving, not much, an inch here, a tilt there, but it was moving. After 2 weeks of absolute resistance, the ancient oak was finally beginning to surrender. "How is this possible?" Marcus said to Dean. "My excavator makes 10 times the horsepower." "He's not using horsepower," Dean said quietly. "He's using leverage." "It's the same thing." "No, it isn't." Dean had been watching Chester work with the eye of a man who understood machinery. "Your excavator applies force in one direction. It's like trying to open a locked door by pushing harder. Chester is working the hinges, taking the door apart piece by piece." 3 hours and 47 minutes after Chester started pulling, the sun was dropping toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the site. Chester had broken roots, shifted chains, and applied pressure from every angle. The stump now sat in a crater of disturbed earth, tilted at 20 degrees, its grip reduced to a handful of the deepest roots on the south side. Chester stopped, climbed down, and walked over to examine it, kicking at the exposed roots with his boot. Then he went to his trailer and pulled out one final chain, thicker than any of the others, with lengths the size of a man's fist. "This is the main pull," he said. "The deep roots are all that's left. One big pull should break them." He wrapped the chain around the center of the stump, ran it through his final pulley arrangement, and connected it to the crawler. Then he climbed into the seat, engaged the clutch, and pushed the throttle forward. The Caterpillar 20 dug in. Its tracks churned the soil. The engine roared with everything it had. 25 horsepower, multiplied by 6, applied through 60 years of iron and steel. The chain went tight as a piano wire. The stump groaned, and then, with a sound like thunder underground, the last roots gave way. The stump rose out of the earth like a creature being born. 300 years of growth, 40 feet of root system, 15 feet of depth, all of it coming up at once, trailing dirt and rocks and broken roots like the tendrils of some ancient monster. It cleared the hole and rolled onto its side, and the construction site fell absolutely silent. Chester climbed down from the crawler, walked over to the hole, looked at it for a moment, nodded once, and began coiling up his chains. The crew erupted, cheering, slapping each other on the back, pointing at the stump, the hole, the old crawler that had done what their modern equipment couldn't. Marcus didn't cheer. He stood at the edge of the crater, staring down into the earth that had held that stump for 3 centuries, his face pale, his hands shaking. Chester finished coiling his chains and walked over. "There's your hole. Should be able to pour your road now." Marcus didn't respond. "Mr. Webb." Marcus finally looked at him. "How?" he said. "How did you do that?" "Same way my father did it. Same way his father did it before him. Some problems don't need more power. They need better thinking. But my equipment, your equipment is designed for different work. Digging, lifting, moving loose material. It's not designed for pulling something that doesn't want to move." Chester patted the side of his crawler. This machine was designed for exactly one thing: pulling. My father used to say that modern machines were built for speed, but his crawler was built for stubborn. Marcus was silent for a long moment. I owe you. Name your price. Chester shook his head. I didn't do this for money. I did it because that Stump was annoying me, sitting there acting like it was smarter than everybody. And because my father would have wanted me to. He believed that if you could help someone, you should. Didn't matter if they deserved it or not. I laughed at you. In front of my whole crew. I called your machine junk. You did. And you still helped me. I didn't help you. I pulled a stump. You just happened to need it pulled. Chester turned and began walking back to his crawler. Wait, Marcus called. What do I owe you? There has to be something. Chester thought about it. You're building 50 houses out here. Nice houses for nice people, people with money, people with education, people who probably don't know the first thing about real work. Put up a sign at the entrance where that stump used to be. Something that tells people this land was farmed for 150 years before it became a subdivision. Something that reminds them that the people who built this country weren't driving Mercedes and wearing designer jeans. They were driving tractors and wearing overalls. Why? Marcus looked at Chester for a long moment. I can do that, he said. Then we're even. Chester engaged the clutch and drove his crawler back toward his farm, the steel tracks clanking against the access road, the engine coughing and sputtering like it had for 60 years.